something just happened that most people are still not fully processing. And by the time you finish watching this video, you're going to understand exactly why it matters, not just for the United States, not just for China, and not just for Taiwan. This matters for every single country that thought it could stay neutral, stay quiet, and wait out what is quickly becoming the most dangerous geopolitical standoff of the modern era. Welcome back to Loud Truth. If you are new here, hit that subscribe button right now, because the story we are about to break down is the kind that reshapes how you see the entire global chessboard. This is not background noise. This is the center of everything. Here is what happened. Donald Trump just delivered a warning to China directly, publicly, and with zero diplomatic softening about Taiwan. And the moment those words landed, shockwaves started moving in every direction at once. China responded through its official spokesman with language that sounded less like diplomacy and more like a barely concealed ultimatum. And now Canada, one of America's closest and most trusted allies, is pushing back in a way that signals something much bigger is fracturing beneath the surface of the Western alliance. This is not just about Taiwan. This is not just about trade. This is not just about one summit in Beijing. This is about the entire architecture of global power being stress tested in real time. And right now, the cracks are showing in places no one expected. But before we get to Canada's stunning response, you need to understand exactly what Trump said, and more importantly, what he chose not to say. Because the gap between those two things is precisely where the real danger lives. Trump sat down after his summit with President Xi Jinping. He was asked directly about Taiwan. And what came out of his mouth was not the careful, pre-scripted language of a traditional American president. It was something far rawer, something that revealed how he actually sees the situation on the ground and what he is truly willing to do or not do when the moment comes. He said straight out, "I think they probably would do something pretty harsh, and then they would be met harshly, and bad things will happen. That is not diplomacy. That is a warning delivered without a safety net." And China heard every single word of it. But then, almost in the same breath, Trump said something that flipped that warning completely on its head. Something so unexpected that allies around the world were leaning forward, reading the transcript twice, wondering if they had understood it correctly. Stay right here, because what comes next changes the entire picture. Before we get to Canada's response, before we talk about what happens next, we need to understand what was actually said inside that room with President Xi, because the statement that came out of China's side immediately after the first meeting was not a press release. It was a signal, a deliberate, carefully worded signal sent to the entire world. China's spokesman released the statement to global media while Trump was still inside the meeting, still sitting at the table. And these were the exact words: "The Taiwan question is the most important issue in China-US relations. If it is handled properly, the bilateral relationship will enjoy overall stability. Otherwise, the two countries will have clashes and even conflicts, putting the entire relationship in great jeopardy." Read that again slowly. Clashes and even conflicts released to the world while the summit was still actively happening. When Trump was asked directly, was that a threat, his answer was revealing. He said, "No, not at all." But then he added something that most of the immediate coverage completely missed. He said that Taiwan dominated the entire conversation the night before, an entire night, just on that one issue alone, and that President Xi, someone Trump has now known for over a decade, has considered Taiwan his single most important personal priority from the very first day they ever met. Trump put it bluntly, "With me, I don't think they'll do anything when I'm not here. I think they might, to be honest with you." Let that land for a moment. The President of the United States is telling the world that the only thing standing between China and action on Taiwan is his personal presence in the bilateral relationship. Not treaties, not military guarantees, not an alliance framework built over 70 years, not deterrence doctrine. Him personally, his relationship with one man. That is an extraordinary thing to say out loud, and it is an even more extraordinary strategic position for every American ally to absorb, because what it implies is that the moment Trump leaves office, or the moment this personal relationship deteriorates for any reason, Taiwan's exposure increases dramatically overnight. Canada heard that. Europe heard that. The Indo-Pacific alliance structure heard that. And the reaction building behind the scenes is not quiet confidence. It is growing, structured alarm, and it is beginning to produce real consequences. So what exactly is the warning Trump delivered about Taiwan? Because this is where the story becomes genuinely explosive and genuinely complicated at the same time. And the complication is not accidental. It reflects exactly how Trump thinks about leverage, risk, and power. Trump did not simply talk about defending Taiwan. He went in a completely different direction. He confirmed that he has been deliberately withholding $12 billion in approved weapons from Taiwan. $12 billion weapons that were signed off on, packaged, ready to ship. And Trump confirmed on camera that he has not sent them. He said plainly, I may do it. I may not do it. His reason, he called the weapons package a very good negotiating chip in his broader dealings with China. He was openly using Taiwan's own security as leverage in negotiations with the country that threatens it. That is the sentence that stopped foreign ministries in their tracks. And then in what may be the single most geopolitically significant statement of the entire summit, Trump said this, I'll make a little news. I'd like to see everybody making chips over in Taiwan come into America. Read that carefully. He was not talking about protecting Taiwan's semiconductor industry where it stands. He was talking about moving it, pulling it out of Taiwan and physically relocating it to American soil, to Arizona, to the states already building out semiconductor infrastructure at enormous speed and scale. On the surface, it sounds like an industrial strategy. And it is. But beneath that economic logic, it carries a chilling implication that every strategic analyst immediately recognized. If the chip industry leaves Taiwan, if the single economic and technological asset that makes Taiwan uniquely critical to the global economy is relocated to American soil, then the strategic rationale for defending Taiwan changes fundamentally. China understands this calculation. Taiwan understands this calculation, and America's allies, including Canada, are now urgently trying to figure out what this means for the global order they thought they understood just 12 months ago. Because this is no longer just a Taiwan story, this is a story about what American commitments are actually worth when the pressure is real. Here is where Canada enters this story, and why it matters far more than most coverage has acknowledged. Canada is not simply a geographic neighbor to the United States. Canada is bound to America through integrated trade relationships, through NATO commitments, through Five Eyes intelligence sharing, and through decades of a partnership built on one foundational assumption, that the two countries broadly agree on how to engage the world's major powers, and that when one speaks, the other has been consulted. That assumption is now factoring, and the Taiwan summit is the moment that brought it to a breaking point. The backdrop matters enormously here. Trump's approach to China had already created significant tension with Ottawa. The sweeping tariff strategy, the dramatic reshaping of trade flows, the unpredictability of American foreign policy. Commitments across multiple files, all of it had been building pressure in the Canadian government for months before Beijing even happened. But the Taiwan summit changed the nature of that pressure, because what Trump revealed in Beijing was not just a new negotiating posture toward China on trade. It was a fundamental reordering of how America views its commitments, its alliances, and its strategic interests across the entire Indo-Pacific, a region where Canada also has deepening economic relationships, diplomatic investments, and long-term strategic interests of its own. When Trump confirmed that the $12 billion weapons package for Taiwan is a negotiating chip, Canada had to ask a question that could not be avoided. If Taiwan's security guarantee is a bargaining tool, what else is? Where does the logic stop? If an ally's defense package can be withheld to extract concessions from an adversary, then what is the actual basis of any American security commitment to any country? Canada's pushback is not emotional. It is not impulsive. It is a calculated, strategic response to a pattern that Ottawa has been watching develop for months. And it is a signal carefully constructed that Canada is no longer willing to simply absorb American foreign policy shifts without registering formal disagreement. The question now is how far that disagreement goes and what it means for the alliance at large. Let us go deeper on the weapons situation specifically, because this is the true hinge point of the entire story. The decision that made everything else land differently than it otherwise would have. Trump confirmed in explicit terms that $12 billion in approved packaged weapons has not been sent to Taiwan. And he confirmed on the record that he is holding them back deliberately as a tool in his broader negotiation with Beijing. He framed it this way: I'm holding that in abeyance, and it depends on China. It's a very good negotiating chip for us. Frankly, it's a lot of weapons. It's $12 billion. Now think about what that means in real practical terms on the ground. Taiwan is a small island. Trump said so himself, 59 miles from mainland China. America is 9,500 miles away. By Trump's own geographic math, in any conflict scenario, the positional and logistical advantage belongs entirely to China before a single shot is fired. And the one thing that could meaningfully offset that disadvantage, advanced American weapons systems, is currently sitting unused, deliberately withheld, while Trump uses it as a bargaining token in trade and diplomatic negotiations with Beijing. Trump was remarkably candid about how he reads the raw military situation. When you look at the odds, China is a very, very powerful big country that's a very small island. He is not wrong about the geography, but the implication hanging in the air behind that statement was extraordinary. The implication was that Taiwan's military position is already deeply challenging, and that America's willingness to change. That calculus is conditional on what China does at the negotiating table. Canada's alarm, and this is the detail the mainstream coverage consistently underplays, is not primarily about Taiwan's immediate military situation. It is about what this posture reveals concerning how Washington now thinks about collective security as a concept. If the United States is willing to treat an ally's defense package as leverage against an adversary, then every country inside the American alliance network must ask the same unavoidable question. Are we also a chip? Is our security also conditional? Is the commitment real, or is it another tool in a negotiating strategy we were never told about? That question is now live and urgent in Ottawa, and the pushback is no longer quiet. There is another layer buried inside this story that received almost no serious coverage, and it may actually be the most consequential strategic development Trump disclosed during the entire summit. He said he wants the semiconductor companies based in Taiwan to move to America, not to partner with America, not to license their technology to American firms, not to build parallel facilities, to physically relocate the operations that produce the most advanced chips on the planet out of Taiwan and into the United States. Trump said it directly. I think all of those chip companies, if they're smart, they're going to start heading to Arizona, and the places where they're building, that's going to solve your problem. Solve your problem. The problem he was referring to is Taiwan's vulnerability to Chinese military and political pressure. This is a stunning strategic reframe, one that deserves far more attention than it has received. Instead of committing American military and diplomatic resources to defending Taiwan in place, Trump is proposing that Taiwan's best available move is to voluntarily hollow out its own strategic value, to relocate the one industry that compels the entire world to pay attention to Taiwan's security situation. And in doing so, to gradually remove the flashpoint by removing what makes the flashpoint matter. There is a certain brutal logic to the argument. If the chip fabrication facilities are operating in Arizona, then China has a diminished economic rationale for seizing Taiwan, and the United States has a diminished strategic obligation to defend it, and the problem dissolves, at least on paper. But here is what that logic deliberately ignores. Taiwan does not stop being 59 miles from mainland China because the chip fabs have relocated. 23 million people do not stop existing because their most valuable industry has been transferred abroad. The democracy that the free world has nominally committed to protecting does not disappear from the map because its economic leverage has been moved to American soil. What Trump's proposal would functionally accomplish, if it were ever followed through, is to strip Taiwan of its economic and strategic leverage while leaving it precisely as geographically and militarily vulnerable as it was before. Canada's foreign policy community understands this analysis. And the concern it produces is not theoretical, it is immediate, because Trump also confirmed that America is targeting 40 to 50% of the world's chip business by the end of his term. That is not just industrial policy, that is a structural redistribution of global technological power conducted without consultation with the allies who share that technological ecosystem. To truly understand why Canada and the broader alliance network are alarmed, you have to understand one more critical dimension of what Trump revealed about his personal relationship with President Xi. Because that revelation is, in many ways, the most unsettling part of this entire story. Not because of what it says about Trump, but because of what it says about the framework America is now operating inside. Trump said this during the summit. The most important thing is relationship. I have a very good relationship with President Xi and with China. It sounds like something that doesn't mean anything, but it's everything in deal-making and problems we've solved. He described American foreign policy toward the world's second largest military power as fundamentally a personal relationship between two individuals, not between two institutions, not between two governments bound by treaties or accountable to legislatures, between Donald Trump and Xi Jinping as men who have known each other for 11 or 12 years, and then in the same conversation, he made the deterrence logic explicit. With me, I don't think they'll do anything. When I'm not here, I think they might, to be honest with you. This is the Trump doctrine on Taiwan, reduced to its core, not strategic ambiguity, not credible military deterrence, not the alliance architecture built across 7 decades of American foreign policy. The deterrent is him, his personal presence in the relationship, his rapport with one man in Beijing. The catastrophic problem with personal deterrence is that it is completely non-transferable. It does not outlast the individual. It does not function through institutions that can carry it forward. It cannot be inherited by a successor administration. It creates no durable framework for the future, and it leaves every ally exposed the moment the personal relationship changes for any reason, health, politics, disagreement, or the simple passage of time. Canada is watching an ally replace a rules-based international order, however imperfect that order may have been, with a personality-based bilateral arrangement between two men. And that replacement makes every other country's security position less predictable, less stable, and less secure, not more. Ottawa registered that conclusion, and the pushback followed. Share this video right now if you think this analysis needs to reach a wider audience. Hit subscribe and turn on notifications because this story is moving fast and we are going to track every development but pass. It breaks. Here is the paradox, sitting at the center of Trump's Taiwan position. And it is worth stating as plainly as possible, because it explains precisely why Canada and the broader alliance network are struggling to formulate a coherent, strategic response to what they witnessed come out of Beijing. On one hand, Trump warned China. He said directly that if China attempted to take Taiwan by force, they would be met harshly and bad things will happen. That is a deterrent statement in the traditional sense. That is America saying to Beijing, we are watching, we are paying attention, and there will be consequences if you move. On the other hand, Trump withheld the weapons. He framed Taiwan's defense package as a negotiating chip. He suggested the chip industry should physically relocate to American soil. He described Taiwan's current leadership as making a risky move by pushing toward independence. He said clearly that he wants the situation to stay as is. He said his position on whether Taiwan should feel more or less secure after his Beijing meetings is neutral. Those two positions cannot coexist coherently. You cannot simultaneously issue a credible threat to defend a country while publicly stripping away the tools that country would need to defend itself, while describing its democratic aspirations as geopolitically inconvenient, while calling your negotiating posture neutral. Beijing sees both sides of that paradox with absolute clarity. She said nothing publicly that acknowledged the contradiction, but Trump reported that she smiled during discussions about leverage and negotiating dynamics. Xi is not confused about what is unfolding. He is calculating, he is measuring the gap between the warning and the reality behind it, and he is deciding what that gap means for his own range of options going forward. The question that Canada, Japan, South Korea, Australia, and every other country inside the American alliance network is now quietly but urgently asking is this: which version of Trump's Taiwan commitment are we actually planning around? The version that warns China, or the version that withholds the weapons and calls the situation neutral, because you cannot build a durable foreign policy around both simultaneously. The contradiction has to resolve somewhere, and when it does, the consequences will be felt far beyond Taiwan. The Taiwan story is the visible flashpoint, but the fracture running beneath it goes far deeper than any single issue, and Canada's pushback is about that deeper fracture as much as it is about Taiwan specifically. Trump's entire posture in Beijing, the emphasis on personal relationship with Xi, the chip industry relocation proposal, the weapons package held deliberately in reserve, the framing of Taiwan's independence movement as risky, the declaration of neutrality on Taiwan's security, all of it points to a fundamental reorientation of American foreign policy, one that consistently prioritizes bilateral deals struck between individuals over multilateral commitments built through institutions, one that treats alliance relationships as leverage rather than as foundations, one that measures foreign policy success primarily through immediate transactional wins rather than long-term strategic credibility. Canada is not reacting to the Taiwan statement in isolation. Canada is reacting to a pattern that has been developing across multiple files, multiple regions, and multiple relationships simultaneously. The same logic that says Taiwan's defense package is a negotiating chip is the logic that renegotiated continental trade relationships as a pressure play. The same strategic instinct that says America's personal relationship with Xi is what keeps the peace is the instinct that has strained relationships with NATO partners who expected consultation before major strategic shifts. The same framework that says move the chip fabs to Arizona is the framework that has restructured global supply chains in ways that disadvantage Canadian industries without warning or negotiation. Canada sees the pattern with clarity, and Ottawa's pushback is a statement not to Beijing, but to Washington that the current direction of American foreign policy is producing strategic costs for allies that were not agreed to, not consulted on, and not acceptable on a long-term basis. The question the Canadian government is now sitting with is one that no American ally has faced directly in the post-war era. It is not whether to trust Trump, it is whether to trust the system, and whether the alliance framework itself remains the organizing principle of American engagement with the world, or whether it has quietly been replaced by something else entirely, something built around deals and personalities rather than institutions and commitments. That is the question driving the pushback, and so far no one in Washington has provided a real answer. Here is the hard truth that this entire situation is pointing toward, and it is important to say it clearly without softening, because the implications are too significant to leave vague. The world is watching the United States, the country that anchored the post-war international order for nearly 80 years, conduct its foreign policy in a mode that consistently prioritizes personal relationships over institutional commitments, bilateral arrangements over multilateral frameworks, and short-term negotiating wins over the kind of long-term strategic credibility that alliances actually run on. And the countries that built their entire security architecture around American commitments, countries that made decisions about their own military spending, their own diplomatic posture, their own economic pre-relationships, based on the assumption that America's word meant something durable, are now doing something they have not done in decades. They're hedging. They are building alternative frameworks quietly. They're asking questions they never expected to have to ask. Canada's pushback is part of that hedge. It is a signal that Ottawa is no longer willing to simply absorb American foreign policy shifts as a matter of automatic alignment. It is a statement that Canada is thinking independently about its own strategic interests, its own relationship with the Indo-Pacific, its own long-term economic architecture in ways that do not necessarily run parallel to Washington's current direction. Trump said something near the end of his Beijing summit that deserves to be the final note of this story. He said, Taiwan would be very smart to cool it a little bit. China would be very smart to cool it a little bit. And that sounds balanced on the surface, but read it carefully. He is placing Taiwan and China in the same moral and strategic frame. He is telling a democratic island of 23 million people living under the constant shadow of an authoritarian superpower with openly stated annexation goals to cool it, using exactly the same language he uses for China. That equivalence is not accidental, and it is not lost on America's allies. It is not lost on Canada. It is not lost on Taiwan. The explosive Taiwan warning Trump delivered in Beijing was real. The contradiction buried inside it was also real. The consequences are already unfolding in diplomatic channels, in alliance conversations, in strategic reviews, being quietly conducted in capitals across the democratic world. And what Canada does next, whether the pushback stays at the level of diplomatic signaling or hardens into something more structurally significant, will be one of the defining early signals of how the Western alliance responds to the new American approach to global power. We are going to keep tracking every development as the story moves. Subscribe to Loud Truth right now if you are not already. Hit the bell so you do not miss a single update. And share this video with someone who needs to understand what is actually happening beneath the headlines, because the quiet part of this story is getting louder by the day, and the world is running out of time to decide what it means.